The Samurai, Japanese Knights. Knights and lords were part of English life during the Middle Ages, but England wasn't the only country that had a feudal system where knights swore to obey lords in exchange for land. Far, far to the east, a very different country also had knights and lords, only in this country the knights were called samurai. We've already read about Japan, which lies right off the coast of the giant country of China. If you were to go from England across the sea to France, where the Normans live, and then travel east, you would go through wild, mountainous country inhabited by nomadic tribes that no one in England knows much about. If you kept traveling east, you would reach the Black Sea and then the Caspian Sea. Down to the south is the Arabian Peninsula, where Muhammad was born. Keep going east, and you'll pass through Central Asia. If you look down to the south now, you'll see India. But you're not in China yet. Travel east a little more until you see the shores of the Yellow River in front of you. Now you're in China. Follow the Yellow River all the way to the coast of China, cross over the Yellow Sea, and you'll see the southern tip of Japan. Japan and England are both islands, but the two islands could not be more different. England is one large island. Japan is made up of 4 long, thin islands, surrounded by almost 4,000 smaller ones. And while England is a peaceful island covered with forests and calm fields, Japan's islands have 65 active volcanoes. The Japanese islands were formed by the collision of 2 parts of the Earth's crust, which pushed up against each other and formed a ridge with molten lava beneath it. This lava still boils up through the crust and erupts through Japan's volcanoes. And throughout Japan, hot springs, called onsen, bubble and steam up from the earth, heated by the molten rock beneath the surface. Japanese samurai used to bathe in these hot springs. We've already read about the Yamato emperors of Japan, who wanted Japan to develop its own way of life rather than borrowing the Chinese ways of living. At the same time that William the Conqueror became king of England, a Yamato emperor was still ruling in Japan. But this emperor, who lived in a huge, elaborate palace, was treated more like a god than like an emperor. He was almost never seen, and he certainly didn't run his country. He left all of that to his noblemen, who were called daimyos. But the daimyos quarreled with each other and didn't take care of the country either. Laws began to break down. Robbers roamed from place to place, taking whatever they liked. And these noblemen found that they needed protection for themselves and for their land. So the daimyos hired warriors to protect them. They promised these warriors land and money, and these warriors, called samurai, promised in return to protect the daimyos and their land from bandits. Just like English knights, samurai took land from a lord, the daimyo, and gave service in return. And just like English knights, the samurai gave pieces of land to peasants who worked on the land and grew food for the samurai. Japan, like England, had a feudal system. Peasants worked for the samurai served the daimyos, and the daimyos served the emperor. The samurai also wore armor, but their armor was made out of iron plates lacquered with bright colors and tied together with silk and leather strips. The lacquer paint kept the iron from rusting in Japan's damp air, and their helmets were shaped into faces, often with elaborate iron mustaches, and painted to look snarling and fierce. They spent years learning how to fight with special curved swords called katanas. Young samurai were taught to perform different sword strokes named after animals, like the cat, the monkey, and the bird. Many samurai thought that their katanas had magical powers. They hired skilled swordsmiths to make the swords and to decorate them with gold, jewels, and figures of dragons. Just like English knights, samurai lived in castles, but Japan had more wood than stone, and although the castles had stone foundations, their walls and towers were often made of timber. Knights in England followed the code of chivalry, but samurai had their own code called the Way of the Warrior. A samurai always had to defend his daimyo, or lord, no matter what. And if he had to fight for his lord, he was required to win or die. To be taken prisoner was a terrible humiliation for a samurai. If he showed cowardice or fear of death, he was expected to kill himself with a special sword in a complicated ceremony called seppuku. But these fierce warriors also wrote poetry and made beautiful gardens. Many samurai wrote short poems called haiku in praise of nature. Here is a medieval Japanese haiku written by the great samurai Matsuwa Basho. This ancient pond here. A frog jumps into the pond. Sound of the water. The gardens of these fierce warriors were full of quiet ponds, lovely flowing streams, moss-covered banks, and peaceful patterns raked into expanses of white sand. Samurai even learned how to dance gracefully. As a matter of fact, one of the greatest samurai warriors ever, General Oda Nobunaga, did a beautiful dance with a fan in front of his soldiers before leading them into war. Nobunaga became the most powerful soldier in Japan, but he still knew how to dance. Samurai used to say, "Practice the arts of peace on the left hand and the arts of war on the right." That meant that they didn't fight all the time, only when they needed to. And in times of peace, they spent their time gardening, writing, and painting instead.